So just a brief word then about gender diversity. Recently, the Canadian government introduced into legislation the inclusion of the words gender identity and gender expression into our Human Rights Code. Now, we already have gender as part of our Human Rights Code, but we're now going to be including gender identity and gender expression. British Columbia, that's working its way through the federal parliament, but British Columbia, in its wisdom, decided overnight to include these in the BC Human Rights Code. And so very quickly, we have had to begin to think about what does it mean to think beyond the binary? What does it mean to talk about gender diversity when we're talking about something beyond men and women? And we have a legal responsibility to deal with this now, because if we were to, for instance, deny someone access to a gender-neutral bathroom, they could actually bring a human rights complaint against us, and we would have to go to court. So, fortunately, there is some information out there. People have been thinking about this for a while, although the inclusion of gender identity and gender expression, the first place to do that was Ontario in 2012. So when we're talking about transgender, we use quite a broad definition to say that it encompasses a wide range of identities, appearances, and behaviors that blur or cross gender lines. And what we know is that transgender students in institutions feel isolated and marginalized. And I would suggest that our transgender faculty and staff also feel isolated and marginalized. And we know where some of those concerns are. It's clear to us that there are concerns around the programming and the way in which we don't ever hear or include the experience of transgender people in our work, in our education programs, that our support services, counseling, and healthcare may not have expertise around transgender students, faculty, and staff, that our policies may be exclusive as opposed to inclusive, that it does deal with physical matters of housing and bathrooms and locker rooms. And I think probably one of the most significant is the issues around records and documents, and what we're able to do and how we're able to respect people's desire to change their gender or to change their names when we're bound by certain legal requirements. And there are things we can do to make a better place for our transgender faculty, staff, and students. We can have policies and protocols that consider the needs of those who are trans and gender diverse. We can consider space. We can make sure we have gender-neutral toilets, changing areas, single-user stalls, options for housing. We can create opportunity for trans folk on the campus to connect with each other. We can educate our staff who deal directly with students. And we can show our support for the transgender members of our community by bringing in speakers and performers. So we've known about that, and we've known about that at UBC for a little while, but it doesn't mean we're doing a very good job. There is some good news. 67% of trans students are satisfied with their access to faculty outside of class. They're satisfied with the quality of the faculty, and some are satisfied with their overall experience at UBC. But I think the bad news is much more telling, because here is where we see a group of students who feel disconnected and as if they don't belong to the institution. And that, to me, is where we need to start doing some real work. We clearly have had success in doing work with women and with women students, since they now represent more than 60% of our successful graduates. But clearly that disconnection is now happening for our gender diverse students as well. One of the things that we've done to start to bring together some of that learning around system, structure, and strategy is to form a trans, two-spirited, and gender diverse working group. And just to tell you two-spirited is the Aboriginal term for trans and gender diverse people. And so this working group has started to formulate some approaches to working with trans faculty, staff, and students around self-determination. It's begun to look at our policies and processes to see where there may be systemic barriers to participation. And it's significantly challenging the administration to think differently and outside of the gender binary. So operating in this world now that is beyond binaries, I think there's some important things we need to think about. First of all, I think we do need to learn the lessons of our successes in supporting our female students and faculty and staff, and use the things that we've learned there to support students who have other forms of diversity. But we're only going to make that change in any of this area if we're thinking all the time systemically, strategically, and structurally. Those three things have to be brought together at any one time. And finally, I think it's important that we remember the central role that universities can play in creating culture change. We have to recognize that issues of gender and diversity in academia are really issues of power and privilege. It will require a shift in our culture, and it's here that I think we should have high expectations of our institutions to undertake this change. Universities have a significant responsibility to contribute to cultural change. We're the site of knowledge production and knowledge exchange. We set research agendas. Our educational mandates mean we have to be stepping up and teaching our students that our understandings of gender can move beyond binaries. We have to be encouraging our faculty to be undertaking research that challenges our accepted ways of being. And we have to ensure that our leadership is willing to speak up and lead around issues of gender and gender diversity and gender expression. Thank you very much. Dankeschön.